Rain needles my scalp as I stand in the doorway, clutching a paper sack that's turning to pulp in my hands. The bag is bleeding marinara through the seams, and my knuckles are so numb I can't tell whether I'm holding dinner for someone else or a message for myself. The door swings open, and the man who answers, tailored suit, silver hair, eyes that don't blink, stares at me the way people look at photographs of the dead. "You're Robert Pierce's boy," he says, voice low, certain. The name hits like a punch under the ribs. The receipt slips from my fingers and sails into a rainbowed puddle where oil blooms outward like a bruise. No one has said my father's name to my face in 2 decades. He left this world when I was 24. I buried him and inherited a corner diner that smelled like onions and hope. I turned that diner into 7 restaurants. I had 7 restaurants until 3 months ago when my wife and my head chef salted the earth and watched my life wither. "I need to show you something about your mother, Evelyn," the man says. "Something that changes everything." He steps aside. "Please." My legs turn to water. There's nothing left to know. I want to say. She died when I was 25. I watched the monitors flatten. I boxed her sweaters myself. But he says her name like he's been rehearsing it for years, like he was told to speak only when I arrived. And the part of me that used to walk through doors without hesitating moves me forward now. I should introduce myself. My name is Daniel Pierce. I'm 44. 3 months ago, my worth, on paper, on magazine lists, in breathless profiles, was $47 million. I owned 7 places across the city, a flagship on the boulevard that drew tourists like a lighthouse, a brasserie tucked under a theater's marquee, a seafood place by the harbor with windows that swallowed the lake, a couple of neighborhood bistros that meant more to me than the expensive ones because regulars brought their kids to grow up at those tables. I lived in a glass box above the water where every sunrise looked like applause. I had a wife, Rebecca, who I believed loved me after 22 years of sleeping back to back and front to front. My head chef, Nikolai, was a brother in everything but blood. I had pulled him out of a restaurant that was closing at midnight the day I first saw him, let him set down his knives and pick up a future. Now I deliver takeout for an app that doesn't care who carries the bag. I'm blacklisted from every kitchen I helped train. Rebecca is in a resort town where winter feels like an idea, spending what she thought would always be ours with the man who stood beside me on the line. They staged a poisoning, pointed the shake of the finger at me, and then vanished under a hot sun. That should have been the end. My reflection agrees. There's a stranger in my mirror. The man who opened the door leads the way down a corridor of quiet. He's posted in the building directory as Harold Benton. His office smells like leather, paper, and a kind of money that came of age before I was born. The lights are warm. The carpet drinks the rain off my sneakers. He has the look of someone who has waited at a window for a ship he was told would appear on a certain foggy afternoon, and here I am, dripping on his Persian rug. "Your mother came to me in 1990, he says, resting a hand on a folder whose edges are the yellow of old piano keys. "Before she met your father. Before you were a line in a prayer." The words feel wrong in my mouth. My mother waited tables. She saved foil and coaxed another day out of tea leaves. She died with nothing but grit and a son who was figuring it out. He doesn't argue. He simply opens the folder. Inside are copies of things that smell like the past. Handwritten notes in her tidy script, legal pages with dates that look like fossils, summaries of investments that predate my first memories. "She left you something," he says. "In a trust. Matures at 45. He knits his fingers together. "Given what was done to you, given the frame up, you're allowed to be told early." She anticipated the possibility that success attracts vandals. The bag from Jasper's is a damp ghost by my shoe, letting a red circle bloom into the rug. 3 months ago, I owned the building Jasper's rents. Now I'm here as his courier, and this stranger is telling me my mother, who mended cuffs by lamplight, built a future so large it needs legal scaffolding to hold it. He slides a statement across the desk. Current value, $83 million. Numbers have weight when they touch down. This one drops through me like an elevator with the cables cut. 83. My mouth is dry. My mother, who pinched pennies like seeds left on a paper plate, somehow tended a harvest this big and never spoke. Evelyn was careful, Benton says, as if he's reading my disbelief the way a sommelier reads a glass. Early investments. Patient reinvestment. She insisted it remain out of sight until the beneficiary had weathered enough life to understand what resources are for. Her word was maturity, not just of the account. He taps the folder. She set a provision. If anyone deliberately shatters your finances through criminal acts, you may be told early, and the trust can be partially used for legal defense and to rebuild your livelihood. My breath won't sort itself out. He hands me an envelope with my name written in her hand. The slant, the loops, my throat burns. I slide a finger under the seal and find my mother's voice. My son, if you're reading this, a storm has taken you apart. I know because Harold would not have broken our rule otherwise. Money is not the lesson, losses. Your father restarted 3 times before you were tall enough to see the counter. Now it is your turn to decide what you will be when everything light has burned off the easy parts. Use this not for revenge. Use it to build what lasts in the dark. Love, Mom. There are moments in life when a room changes shape without moving. The ceiling lifts. The walls breathe. I sit in a chair I can't feel. How did you know you'd find me? I ask, not ready for answers, but needing them anyway. I didn't, Benton says. I have been ordering delivery from every corner of this city for 3 months, twice a day, sometimes more. Your mother asked me to keep an eye on you if ever the ground gave way under your feet. She believed success is not a straight line. She watched your father's wasn't. He smiles, and it is not unkind. When you appeared with a bag of pasta, I recognized your father's cheekbones and your mother's eyes. There's more. There is always more. He produces another file, names I know, printed in fonts that make my skin cold. Your mother kept notes on certain people who would circle your light if you ever built one, he says softly. She was watchful, without being suspicious. Rebecca is here. So is your head chef. He touches the pages like they're a fragile map. She worried you would trust too completely. A week later, the trust provision is executed. But I'm ahead of the story. I should tell you how the bottom fell out. It started like a day that had happened 1,000 times. It was still dark when I laced my shoes. I kissed Rebecca's hairline and left her asleep in a bed that looks now, in memory, like a stage set. The lake was a sheet of dark glass under a strip of pink. I walked the length of my flagship's dining room at 6 a.m., trail lights under crystal, hands touching chair backs the way a priest touches pews. The kitchen was awake to me, ovens ticking as they warmed, the stainless steel breathing back my reflection. We were ready for whatever the day would ask. Unscheduled inspection, my assistant said later, cheeks the color of paste, fingers worrying the edge of her clipboard. Not our usual guy. The other one is out sick. This one said his name is Adler. Fine, I thought. We run clean. We go overboard. We compete to be the place no inspector can improve. I saw Nikolai appear in the doorway and didn't ask why his eyes darted between me and the clock. I glanced at my phone and noted the message from Rebecca. Don't wait up, spa day, late dinner. None of it was strange enough to snag. The inspector walked through like a man with a checklist he was eager to complete. Young, anxious fingers. He ran a gloved hand over surfaces that would have gleamed in a mirror. He checked temperatures on appliances I had personally examined an hour earlier. He frowned at data that looked textbook to me. Everything seems in order, he said, disappointed. Just need to sample a few dishes. Procedure. Chef, tasting menu, I said, and Nikolai lifted a chin in acknowledgement. Soup, salad, a main, let our work speak for itself. I went to my office to wrestle with supplier invoices and wondered whether the price of beef would ever stop climbing. The scream wasn't kitchen noise. It shifted the air pressure. I was running before my coffee cup completed its arc to the floor. The inspector's body was on the tile, convulsing, foam at his mouth, the whites of his eyes rolled up like someone had flipped a switch. We called emergency services, and I tried to dredge CPR from a class I took in a world that doesn't exist anymore. What did he eat last? I shouted. The béarnaise, Nikolai said, strangled. On the salmon. The ambulance took him. The police took my dining room. Yellow tape stitched itself across doorways I had walked through thousands of mornings and nights. Faces, customers, staff, blurred into a mural of fear. The first news alert hit while they were still collecting their samples. Cameras were on the sidewalk before my blood pressure found a rhythm. They found ricin in the sauce. A detective told me under fluorescent lights 13 hours into a conversation that didn't feel like a conversation. Enough to put a man in the ground. If he dies, we're talking homicide. That's not possible, I said, stunned past eloquence. No one in my kitchen would even know where to get. You tell me, she said, pushing photos across the table. Security still show you in the prep area half an hour before the inspector arrived. You did a sweep of stations. Our head chef witness says you were particularly interested in the sauce. Says you seemed nervous. I blinked as the room tilted. He told you that? She continued, expressionless. He also claims you knew about this surprise inspection in advance. Says you got a tip. Something inside my chest went quiet. A room closed and locked. I want a lawyer, I said. By the time I stepped into daylight, the name I had built had been torn into 1,000 jagged pieces by a machine that does not pause to confirm. Contracts shriveled like leaves under a torch. Investors called with voices that sounded like eulogies. The city that once loved to put my face under lights did the opposite in a single news cycle. That evening, I watched my wife fold her clothing with the calm of an accountant balancing a column. She didn't look at me until she zipped the suitcase. I can't be tied to this, she said, tone neutral and legal. My attorney will be in touch. Becca, I said, using the name I had said against her skin for 22 years. You know me. She looked then, and I saw not anger, not even grief, but something surgical. Your head chef says you've been paranoid about inspections for months. Says you called him at dawn about sauce. It's not my job to sort out whether you did this. I'm not going to be here when it lands. She shut the door on our apartment and on the person I believed she was in the same motion. The next morning, the section of our security footage that would have exonerated me was inexplicably corrupted. What remained, me entering the prep area, looked like motive without context. Licenses were revoked. Doors shuttered. A month of nights knocked on my phone like debt collectors. Lawsuits, angry patrons, employees wondering how rent gets paid. The bank took what it could lean. My accounts froze, pending whatever next indignity was coming. 2 weeks after she left, a message arrived. You'll never work in this industry again. Should have been smarter about the prenup. He sends his regards. It was only then that I understood the scope of the orchestration. They were together. They had been together. They had taken my life apart with a metronome to guide their timing. Rock bottom is not a cliff. It is a floodplain. The water rises quietly, inch by inch, while you stand in the kitchen watching drawers float open. I moved into a studio over a nail salon where the air carried acetone and gossip. The rent was $600 and felt like a master's test. The app approved me in an afternoon, no questions asked, just a driver's license and a willingness to move warm food through weather. Delivering is a practice in invisibility. You learn to walk softly. You learn the cracked steps of buildings you never noticed from behind the wheel of your old car. You learn which elevators bark and which doorman wave you away like an inconvenience. You learn the length of the city by its hunger. I built a routine I could live inside. Wake late because morning air smelled like the old life. Start at 11 and chase the lunch rush. Eat noodles from a foam cup with chopsticks that splinter. Drive the dinner hour until your eyes are grains of salt. Good days meant $23 after gas. Bad days made you wish numbers didn't exist. A cap pulled low hid the man I had been. My clothes hung looser each week. Friends, ex-friends, ordered from me and never knew the ghost at the door. At night, the silence was worse than the hunger. Kitchens fill your head with sound. The hiss, the call-in response, the crescendo of service. In a quiet room over a salon, the quiet keeps talking. I dreamed of my mother sometimes. I remembered things I hadn't thought about in years. How she used her sleeve to wipe my chin when I tried to drink from a bowl. How she pressed $1 into my palm and told me saving small things leads to bigger ones. How she made me promise, when the machines beeped slower, to take whatever my father left and grow it into something he'd recognize in the next life. Then, one afternoon, an order from Jasper's blinked onto my screen. Chicken marsala, salad, breadsticks. The address was a law office in one of those old downtown buildings with brass that shines no matter how hard the winter leans on it. Suite 412. I almost declined. High security means ID checks, which means faces, which means recognition. But the tip promised enough to keep my tank from coughing, so I put on the hazards and jogged through rain. The elevator creaked like a throat clearing. I watched the numbers climb and listened to a message tone. Another request waiting on the other side. I followed the carpet that cost more than my month, knocked on the door, and met the man who said my father's name like a benediction and my mother's like a turning key. After Harold Benton showed me that folder, after I read her note twice and put it away because the paper was getting wet with my hands, the investigation spun up like a machine that had been idling this whole time. Benton's people traced calls and stitched together trails. They recovered messages between Rebecca and Nikolai that made me sick, not because of the betrayal. I was past shocked, but because of the precision. They had studied intro chemistry until it turned into a weapon. They had paid a regular inspector to call in sick, so a rookie would arrive who wouldn't know our rhythms. They had chosen a dosage meant to hurt and not kill, because killing would shift the frame of the story, and they wanted me blamed for malice, not murder. They miscalculated, or he measured with a heavy hand. Either way, a man's kidneys will never forgive them. Federal agents took Rebecca off a beach in handcuffs while her drink sweated in the sun. They caught Nikolai in Miami right before he signed for a lease on a place he planned to call Phoenix, as if he had invented fire and ash. At trial, Rebecca's poise curdled. Her testimony broke open, and what poured out was rage sprayed in all directions. She talked about the interviews that led with my name, the articles that called her the chef's wife, when she was the one reading the balance sheets at 2 in the morning. She said she'd found someone who saw her, and that if I'd paid attention, we might have built together. She never said sorry. Neither did he. They each received 15 years. The inspector lived. When the truth came out, he sued them, not me, and sent word through his lawyer that he hoped I'd find a way to build good out of the rubble. People say things like that because it makes the worst parts of their life feel less random. I kept the note. I read it when the world gets loud. You'd think that when money arrives, all at once, like lightning in a field, you'd pivot on your heel and walk back into the shine. I didn't. Even after Benton triggered the clause and the trust opened a door I didn't know existed. Even after my name was cleared and every reporter who called me a monster filed a correction with their hands shaking, I kept delivering. The Honda's air no longer fought the heat. The cap still shadowed my face. I carried other people's dinners up other people's stairs. My friends thought I was being theatrical. Investors called with eager voices, as if they had always believed in me. But there were lessons I could only hear with someone else's food warming my wrist. The woman on the third floor of a building that smelled like rain and old linoleum ordered soup 3 nights a week and tipped me $5 in crumpled singles. For your gas, she'd say, like I was her grandson. Night shift nurses showed me what hunger looks like when all you've eaten is adrenaline and a breath between alarms. The salon owner below my studio, a woman named Mrs. Lin who had come here in her 20s and built a life from scratch, slid leftovers under my door at closing like nobody was watching. The other drivers became a loose family you see in fragments. There was Marcus, who wanted to build a food truck with a fryer that could keep up with the line in August. Destiny, who cooked Saturday supper clubs out of a studio apartment on a griddle that took 10 minutes to get hot. Jerome, who had index cards with his grandmother's measurements written in a script that looked like patience. They didn't know who I had been, and it was a relief. When I opened a door again, it wasn't to a palace. The new place sat in a zip code menus forgot. We called it a kitchen, not a restaurant, because that's what it was, a room where heat meets hunger and turns into relief. We served fine food at prices that made sense to the mailman, the nurse, the teacher, the crew pouring concrete down the street. The business model offended spreadsheets. The trust made up the distance at first. Word spread because something happens to taste when care is baked into cost. I hired like I meant the word second chances. People with records. People with rehab chips in their pockets. People who needed the steadiness of a shift more than a lecture about past mistakes. The head chef was not a man poached from a glossy magazine spread. It was Destiny, who had a palate that could pick out a clove of garlic in a crowded room and a laugh that brought the kitchen to attention. She wrote a menu that lived and breathed. Marcus ran the truck that parked outside factories at sunrise. Jerome's grandmother's recipes became the dishes people asked for by name. We put her initials at the top of the page and mailed her a copy every season. Mrs. Lin eats free on Sundays. She comes with half her salon in tow. Benton has a table by the window and orders 2 courses for lunch as if he still needs to lure me into his office with a bag. The inspector came in once, quiet, shoulders tight. He shook my hand, and we looked at each other for a beat too long. "I'm glad you're cooking," he said. It was the simplest benediction I've ever received. 3 months into service, I found myself standing in the back doorway at closing, the city breathing at the curb. I had been carrying money around like a weight I didn't know how to set down without breaking something. Then a letter arrived from a prison return address. Inside, a handwriting I knew as well as my own laid out words like stepping stones. Forgiveness, mistake, regret, time. I read it. I set it on the desk. And I wrote one sentence back. "I hope you become someone you would have loved back then." The trust matured on schedule 11 months after that rainy night. Just like my mother ordained when she was 23 and the world had not yet had me in it. 45, she believed, is the age when the mirror shows you not just your face, but your choices. Turns out she was right to the decimal. Above the line where the servers turn into the kitchen, there's a small plaque most people don't notice unless they look up while they're laughing. The letters are cut from old flatware we melted down and said, "Evelyn's garden, where what's broken grows back stronger." It's a reminder for me more than anyone. She didn't hide money to save me from losing. She built a safety net so that when I fell, I could climb. The places we've built since aren't on the boulevard. They live in neighborhoods where the bus stops are crowded at dawn. The food tastes like work done with intention. The prices let people leave full and still have enough to buy their kids winter boots. Everyone on the payroll owns a piece. If we do well, we do well together, not by accident, but by design. You can taste the difference in a sauce when the one stirring it shares in the upside. I still drive sometimes, no app needed. I drop off a tray to the nurse's station. I take soup to the woman on the third floor who calls me sweetheart with a smile like a stricter grandmother. I roll out dough late with destiny and watch the sunrise catch in the steel. There are days I think about the old dining room with the crystal and the applause and the articles with my name in fonts too big to be true. I'm grateful I got to learn what that felt like. I'm more grateful I learned how to cook without it. People ask what I would say to the version of me who stood in that doorway with a bag soaking through, shaking like it was winter downtown when the calendar said October. I would tell him to step inside, to listen to the man with the silver hair, to open the letter last and not first, to know that the worst thing that ever happened to him was about to expose him to the best parts of himself, to keep the faith of the kid who mopped a diner after close and counted the quarters and thought, someday. If you're still here with me, if you found any light in this story, pass it on. Hand it to someone who is standing in their own doorway with rain in their hair and a bag that won't hold. Tell them rock bottom isn't a place where you drown. It's the ground from which you jump. And if you're ready, subscribe. There are more stories like this. Real people, real losses, real rebuilds. Sometimes the thing that knocks you flat is the same thing that clears a line of sight. Sometimes the gift arrives in an envelope you don't open until your hands have learned to work without applause.